Just waiting a second. Okay, we're live. Okay, I haven't done a live stream in a long time, and this is the first time with me using StreamYard. So I hope it works.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
I actually don't even know. Okay, comments. We'll see. Okay, I clicked on it. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's sometimes distracting though. That's sometimes distracting in live. You're like,
oh, should I not? Okay,
no,
we'll
you
look at it at the
can.
end. No.
It's sometimes good because if people ask questions, you can pull them in or whatever. It's up to you and how you want to do it. But
oh, you're giving me too many options, Cass. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave it on private chat. So if you need to write me something, and I'll go to comments at the end, and then we'll address those things at the end. Okay. So welcome to Andrea with the Bangs, Cassidy.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be this historic moment of your first live guest.
It is. I've never done a live guest, and it's because I didn't know how to do it. So that's literally the only limiting factor. And so now I actually have the ability with StreamYard. Thank you. I thought it was called Stream Duck because of the little logo.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense.
That's not what it's called.
I wish it was.
That's like a bit more on the nose when that's their logo, right? But anyway, so now this is the beginning of like having more interesting live streams because I only have done like 3 or 4, I think, in like years. In the years I've had this, like 4 years, and I think I just was I'm kind of boring on my own unless I've scripted something out. Well, I'm not great at riffing, you know, like I'm not like a Paul Vanderklay where he's like, hey, I just do this for my like a living.
Yeah.
No, so I'm not great at that.
I've dabbled in the live streams with my channel, but it's mostly been open conversations.
Right.
And in the moments when I have to riff, I'm like, oh, this is this. I much prefer when someone joins me. There's more fun in like playing off somebody than sitting.
Right, and that's why I'm not a single orator person. Like that's why for the festival, which is one of the reasons why I had you on my channel to talk about that as well. The Breakwater Festival happening in Germany, October something.
27th to the 29th.
27th to the 29th. I am, for my part, as a speaker, I'm not going to be speaking alone. I'm going to be interviewing Paul because I don't have an hour and a half's worth of stuff, or even an hour, to be like, hey,
that's what you do. You have the podcast where you talk about people or talk with people. So
yeah, about things.
Totally fits.
Yeah. Yeah, I just planned that out better. So better in the first place. Anyway, so can you tell us a little bit about how to get tickets and all? I just want to get all of that out of the way first, and then we'll talk about female tropes in film.
Sure. So, like Andrea said, I am helping organize the Breakwater Festival in Germany, Mannheim, October 27th through the 29th. Basically, it's a festival aimed at helping estuary groups kind of ground and find a little bit more community in real person. And we had our first festival last year under a different name, but this year we started the second festival with the Breakwater Festival, working with the same estuary we did last year in Germany, and helping them grow even deeper in the connections that they've already made, and hopefully bringing some new faces along. So Paul Vanderklay will be there along with Andrea with the Bangs.
Along with me, yes.
Yes. Thomas Steininger and Aaron Venos, who teaches philosophy in a university here at Utrecht. And then Thomas runs Evolve Magazine in Germany, friends with John Vervaeke. He's had some conversations on his channel. So all really interesting people bringing some very fun things to the table. So I can provide you with a link to put into the description.
Sure,
but
yes.
we have a Shopify account, and I can give you all the links to how you can support that. We're also selling some t-shirts. If you can't come, but you'd like to support efforts, we have some very high quality lobster merch that is available to those who have interest.
But who doesn't love lobster merch?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know if I want to meet those people. Right. Just kidding.
Actually, you know what? Lobsters were really in like kitschiness, like in a kitsch kind of in the 50s. There's a lot of lobster themed like kitchen things and like prints on fabric. Oh, also, I think I want to say hello because I decided to click back on the comments. So I'll say hello to Ardoniel, which has a very Tolkien-esque sound to it, so that's cool. And then Richard Rowland, friend of the show. Hi,
Friend of the
Richard.
show, Richard Rowland. Richard, me and my husband have been watching a lot of your conversations, so yeah, very very interesting stuff.
I kind of feel like Richard has become almost like a almost co-hostish with me on my channel.
He's the co-host to everybody, to
Like he
Peugeot.
kind of is like that's kind of his job description in internet land because I just find it's because of the different topics. So I was like, Tolkien is the kind of more obvious one, but then C.S. Lewis and then Dante, those are kind of within his wheelhouse. But then another thing, the Rings of Power, of course, did buckle. The show that shall not be named.
Shall not be named, yeah.
And actually, there's been another thing, Richard, if you're listening, which I imagine you still are, since you're leaving in comments. So,
Richard has become a ghost in this conversation. We're just going to talk to him the whole time.
I know. That's what happened. So I think I want to talk to somebody about superheroes. Particularly, I'm thinking someone like maybe like the early ones, like say DC ones. Superman kind of being the one that's kind of the original, but superheroes being sort of the founding myth of America. The mythos. He mentioned this once, and I think it was just a passing thing. He talked about the Old West and then superheroes. I'm not like dying to talk about the Old West, so that's why I'm like, okay, superheroes, and I go into that. And I do want to talk to a number of people about it, but I was kind of like, I guess I'll have Richard on again to talk about that. But it's an idea that was inspired by him. So
there's a lot to unpack there. There's definitely some truth in DC, Marvel Cinematic Universes becoming modern myths of our day. And I haven't thought through the idea enough to speak strongly about it, but I see the connection there.
Yeah, well, it's just something that like we're just such a new nation, and by we I mean I'm talking North America, being that I'm Canadian, but and it's just founding myths are a big deal, and for establishing identity. Anywho, is there anything else that did I highlight this comment?
Yeah, you highlighted it.
I don't know what I'm doing. How do you unhighlight? Okay.
You just click it again.
Okay. So this is why I'm glad that only like 4 people are watching. Hi. You matter so much, the 4 who are. But I just don't know what I'm doing at all. So this is a good learning curve for me.
Sure. Nothing new to add about the festival. You probably will have to touch on the Wild West and the mythos of that to talk sort of fully about superheroes and what brings them there, but that's a whole different topic.
Absolutely. I know. So hello to people who are coming. Hi, Stephanie. I don't know if I have a friend, Stephanie. I don't know if that's who that is.
I think it's Stephanie from the Discord.
Oh, okay. Hi. Well, hi, Stephanie from the Discord.
I'm assuming. I do.
Well, you want to give the shout outs. So thank you I just appreciate anyone leaving comments to make us look like popular. And to up doesn't that up in the algorithm when you have comments on your live streams? I don't know.
I'm not, probably. Algorithms change quite often. That's some of the difficulties with social media and understanding them if you are trying to grow a brand that is.
To me, they're almost like a myth. Like there's the mythic algorithm, It's like, anyway. So, anyhow, so on to PS. Also, I'm really excited to, the bread and butter. But I do want to say I'm really excited to be in Germany and to participate in the group.
Well, we're very excited to have you. I think you'll add a lot of depth and a different perspective to it. And so I'm excited to see how all of the speakers interact with each other and add something different to whatever this thing that is shaping, call it a little quarter of the internet, a restaurant, whatever. I'm I'm excited to see how that all comes out, and I'm excited to just to see you be able to interact with a lot of the Europeans who either watch you or have known you from the Discord, and get that sense of community that has been disconnected through just online participation.
Well, it's something that I've been missing. Like, I've been missing being on the Discord because there was a sort of space that was created during COVID, and I should just like try a little bit more to go on. I do want to go on to meet more people who are attending the festival. Maybe we can have games nights or something. I don't know. We're just doing a planning meeting right now.
Yeah. Well,
You know how we used to do game night on bridges? Maybe we could do
do
that
remember.
on the. You do, because that's how you met your husband.
Yeah.
Sorry, got to know your husband.
Yeah. Yes.
Before he was your husband.
Yeah. No, we met before, I guess, technically. Yeah. Well, I know Matthias is organizing some smaller estuary groups with people who have bought tickets so that you can kind of facilitate those things. So we could obviously get you involved in that if you wanted to do that, or any sort of way you want to create connection. We're happy to facilitate that as well through the Breakwater Fest Discord, which is more specifically for people interested in what we're doing with the events and festivals and resource for estuaries. Yeah, and again, I'll give a link to you for that, so that people do have interest can join.
Okay. So on to the main event. So, Cassidy, you have a background in film.
Yes.
And I remember mentioning something about 500 Days of Summer, and you said that, I don't remember exactly what you said. You said something along the lines of like, I've done my doctoral thesis on that. No, just kidding. You didn't say doctoral thesis, but you studied it or something.
Well, okay. So just quick background. I am a filmmaker. I got my degree from San Francisco State University in cinema. And yes, 500 Days of Summer is a very impactful film for me. It is probably one of the films that inspired me to actually go out and make movies. So I might not have my doctorate thesis in it, but I certainly have a love and appreciation for it. I've thought a lot about that and the realm that it plays in sort of the trope, not only of romantic comedies, but sort of the shape of cinema itself. I think it's a great film. And
I love it.
yeah, it certainly has a complicated relationship with the idea of the manic pixie dream girl.
Okay, so yes, there are two tropes particularly that I wanted to speak to you about. I'd say they're some of the more modern tropes. Like, I don't want to talk about like, the dumb blonde or whatever. That's sort of the 50s, 60s. I mean, if it comes up, that's fine. But I'm particularly thinking about manic pixie dream girl and Not Like Other Girls, the cool girl. But let's start first with the manic pixie dream girl. So I feel like, so I'm just going to say personally what I feel about her.
Sure.
I feel like usually the examples are Summer from 500 Days of Summer, Kate Winslet's character from Eternal Sunshine.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. And then, and
Kate Winslet
then
from, yes, and then Kirsten Dunst from
Elizabethtown. So I've heard people say it's mostly Kirsten Dunst is the exact version of that. And then the other ones have other things. And Garden State, Natalie Portman as well.
So some of the history of the evolution of the manic pixie dream girl, the term was coined by Nathan Rabin in an AV Club article back in 2007, where he was basically criticizing Elizabethtown and why it failed, and referred to Kirsten Dunst's character in that film as what he likes to call the manic pixie dream girl, also referencing, Natalie Portman and Garden State. And from there, it took its own form and light. People picked up on it and, sort of spread it around. And now it's in our film lexicon and our pop culture lexicon. And, the writer himself has some mixed emotions of how that's been used and sort of how it gets put onto a lot of different characters throughout film, but still sort of playing with what he thinks is this dangerous idea of the portrayal of woman in this manic pixie dream girl state, where she's sort of the wild, free fairy who only exists to fulfill the desire of, lonely writers and, basically are the thing that show men how to live. Is that how you understand it?
Yes, so yes, that she's just very much only there to forward the male protagonist, but not in a
Mhm.
supporting way, in a I don't know, like, in an almost like in a
A very passive way, so it's almost
yes,
like her only characteristic is sort of this, almost mythic type character that doesn't have any grounding in, uh, the reality of real women and,
right.
yeah, sort of these, like, fantasy portrayals from, these young men, idealistic writers
Mhm,
that,
mhm.
spark, um spark those men to see them and then, find meaning in life. These depressed men to grab life by the reins.
Right, so I've heard that of the slew of gals we've just listed, or characters, I should say, that, like, that Summer and I can't remember her name, but, like, Kate
Mhm.
Winslet's character in Eternal Sunshine, the 2 of them have been defended that they are more grounded than the others. So that's just a little minor on the side, and I actually agree with that. I think that they seem quite sad, um, and they're not just manic all the time. So I don't know, do you wanna give
My
your
perspective
thoughts?
of it?
Yeah, just on that bit, and then
Um,
we'll
yeah, I think the idea of it is very interesting. Clearly, filmmaking is a complicated a complicated art form, that is still very young in its, adaption and,
mhm,
like, participation. It's a very young art, so there's still lots of things we're learning and defining, so some of these questions about how we challenge the way we represent characters and people, makes complete sense. I sometimes think it, it's too one-sided or not looking at the whole scope of, um, the form of what film is actually supposed to do, and so sometimes these criticisms, while certainly valid, that, this type of woman that is represented. And I've never seen Elizabethtown, so I don't
mhm,
know. I've seen Garden State a long time ago,
mhm,
so I don't. I can't say that she has no agency or whatever. But we can make the criticism that these are just heightened, unrealistic versions of reality,
mhm,
um, and that is true. But sometimes that's what filmmakers are doing to um, sort of bring out something that is true and like make it more visible. So I'm a huge fan of absurdism, especially absurd comedy, and
okay,
you sometimes and Garden State would be a certain type of absurdism that is playing out. Zach Braff is is known for sort of his overly whimsical
mhm,
characterization of things and sort of the colors and the way that he uses the world. He's not necessarily trying to make it grounded in reality, like something you would see in the realm of realism, which you could
mhm,
look at something like the show Parenthood.
mhm,
Um, well, like go back far enough, The Bicycle Thief, these the places where it started in Italy after war torn or taking these films in war torn Italy and kind of trying to express the complexity of what it is to um, live after that war and what people are actually going through in like a very visceral way. And then
mhm,
it comes out in a lot of ways, but you can make these tropes about women and say that they're one dimensional, but there's something true about, well, the men in those films usually are a little bit too. They're all heightened
mm.
versions of themselves, and so there's a complicated relationship happening. And so I think we should kind of ask ourselves, okay, this is triggering something in us. Why? And not go to it's problematic or misogynistic. I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay, I was just gonna ask if you thought that it was problematic. So, it's more complicated is the short.
Well, it's not that there can't be problems with that, or there might be inconsistencies, and there's certainly dangers of how we represent those things. But I think what becomes the problematic part is when we don't consume those things with intentionality. We don't look to what the creator's trying to do,
Mhm.
and really kind of wrestle with those questions.
Mhm.
And I like to see filmmaking in this form of films are not teaching me how the world is.
Mhm.
They're showing me a version of how someone else sees the world. And
Mm.
through that, it might be able to enchant something in me to see the world I never could before. And
Okay.
so I think when it comes to a lot of these questions, you really have to go to the film and try to understand, well, what's happening, what's going on, before just saying this is misogynistic, point blank.
Right. Okay. So let's talk. Okay. So that's the Manic Pixie Dream Girl we've covered, and it's complicated about whether or not it's problematic or not,
Well,
especially intention of the creator.
well, there's something interesting, and I think this is true that any idea that gains sort of popularity or resonates with an audience, there is reflecting something true, good, or beautiful about that. And so, if we deny the fact that there is something resonating with people,
Mhm.
men and even women, about this heightened version of a woman in the manic pixie dream girl trope, we're doing a disservice to understanding the full sense and complexity of what's going on and how we ground that in our lives and humanity, and what we can do to look at that to um, kind of reshape our view of the world and how other people see it. But like, this idea that women can be these like beacons of beauty that inspire men,
Mhm.
I think there is something fundamentally true to that. Now, is there dimensions and complexity, and is the way that those movies play that out in the narratives the best way to see that and manifest that in life? I would say probably not. I think there's probably some dangerous things going on, but
Mhm.
you know, you should take everything you're consuming with a grain of salt in that way.
Okay.
Because every movie is not teaching you this is how life should be. A lot of times we're looking at the world, and it really depends on the creator and what they're trying to do. But a lot of times you take these forms that we see in the world, and the modern woman, you can see a lot of reflection of these manic pixie dream girls in what we are told to express ourselves, or how many young, especially adolescent women express themselves.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just opens the question of why is that, and what is intriguing about that, and where's the true good and beautiful thing within those concepts.
So when I was, I'd say, a young adult, maybe in my early 20s, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl was a trope that was often done. And I remember seeing those films come out
Mm.
in my young adulthood. But now I would say that the Not Like Other Girls, like the cool girl, I say that's more current. Like there's so many Not Like Other Girls that like it's if you look that up on Google for memes, it would just be like pages and pages
Sure.
and pages.
And
Not one
and
of
what's
those
your
regular moms. I'm a cool
I'm
mom,
a cool mom. Yeah.
right? Like that
Yes,
that
sure, sure.
version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so what's your relationship with that? I saw a video, I did some research for you. I hope
Ooh.
you're so happy. I
Yeah,
really
I'm
kind
so
of
happy. I did no
engulfed
research
myself
at
in
all.
this and tried to really think through the question. But I saw a video that I think you will find interesting with your channel, but I'd like to hear your first. Like,
Mhm.
what's your conception with that, and where has this idea struck a chord with you most?
Not Like Other Girls, that idea.
Yeah, the not like other girls.
Okay, so first of all, I how I see it, because I first found out about it specifically. You know how you know something exists, but you don't know it until the words are put to it.
Mhm.
So I remember watching a movie review of Gone Girl,
Mm.
and that she talks about it. Like it's written in the film. See, I actually haven't seen it because I didn't think I had the stomach for it, to be honest.
It's a confronting film.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you've seen it. Okay. So, but I did see they showed her do her little monologue about the cool girl. And so that seemed interesting to me. And then I also, just to bring in so more personally, I'd say how I've interacted with more personally, I know I joked about it, but like, I'm not like regular moms, I'm a cool mom. And I remember the first time my sister joke quoted that at like when she'd had a baby at 22, almost 23. Sorry, she was married. But
Yeah.
she was a young mom, and she had like I don't know, like a cute like track outfit on, or
Tracksuit.
yoga
Yeah.
outfit or something. Yeah, it was kind of matchy. It wasn't like the velour velvety one, but it was just almost like pre Lululemon kind of thing, or maybe it was Lululemon. I don't know. But I was like, oh, that's cute. It was new. And she's like, I'm not one of those regular moms. I'm a cool mom. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, haha, that's so funny. You are a mom and you're a cool mom. And I believed it. And it made me think, oh, and I think probably dating or engaged soon thereafter, and then having kids within a couple years. And that always kind of stuck with me. Like, right, like we're not like regular 90s, like 90s moms, no offense, okay? 90s moms were kind of frumpy. Like, you watch the very first episode of Seinfeld, and the gal that he's like interested in, I'm like, oh my word, look at that frumpy lady, Jerry
Well,
Seinfeld.
the 90s was full of frump.
I
Frump
know,
was
I know, and I know that was in like,
yeah.
Laura Ashley and Jessica McClintock and all that. But like, and the puffy sleeves and like the
High-waisted
vests.
jeans.
Yeah,
It's coming
high-waisted.
back.
And like it is. No, and I have a ton of high-waisted pants, but like in my opinion, the 90s, or sorry, the 80s and 90s, they were just really bunched at the waist, in my opinion, compared to the like smooth fitting from the 40s. Whatever, I'm getting into it. I'm sorry. Let me go back on track. So regarding the where am I? Oh yes, the cool mom. So I remember thinking like, okay, like literally I remember I had an outfit, like my mom always would make us dresses for Easter, and sometimes they were matching her, sometimes not. And like it was just like literally I remember wearing a certain outfit that was like a white t-shirt with like a frock, I'll call it, over top. And I remember someone from junior high was like, you dress like my mom, or you look like a mom. And I remember like, I'm just so embarrassed, whatever. But I just was like, I'm not even doing it on purpose. Like the people my age who were having babies, and who, like, for me and my sister having babies, like we weren't doing it on purpose. Like, oh, we don't want to dress like our moms. It was not a specific thought, except for when I thought about that one quote that my sister did from Mean Girls. But like I was like, okay, we just look way cooler. We do. We looked way cooler and more interesting, in my opinion, in the sense the yoga pants, SUV, like basic bitch mom. No offense. Again, I just have to use those words because that's the most sort of tropey phrasings
Sure.
of what is. It wasn't a trope when I was like becoming a mom. It was becoming. That's where the tropes were made. Was when in the 2010s. And
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, like we are not our mother's generation of moms. Like we are cool moms. Look at us with our yoga pants and our like Starbucks and our.
Well, it's interesting. These are modern ways this idea has manifested. But I saw Richard said in the comment, Liz Bennett from Pride and Prejudice was the
Lizzie, yeah,
OG,
she
not like the
was.
other girls. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
true. Like if you look at stories throughout history, especially ones that still resonate very much in modern frames, and these are the ones that get turned into period
Yeah,
pieces
Jo
like
March,
Pride and
right?
Prejudice,
Yeah.
Jo March. It is this not like other girls trope. And so it sometimes feel when we look at these modern ways, and you can take Mean Girls as an example, because you have all of this complication of these different identities in which young adolescents, men and women, sort of put on costumes and morph themselves to try to find this identity and figure out what it means to be a man or a woman or and how to be accepted with that in society. It's not new.
Right.
And there is something fundamentally true about that concept of how fragmented. Um, I think men feel it too, but especially women feel and trying to understand what it is to be um, a woman and what it is to do that in a modern frame.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you got the I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom. But you also
Mhm.
have you look at it at Mean Girls where you have Caddy who um, is this homeschooler from Africa, goes to this school. She ends up with the freaks. And
Mhm.
then through this process ends up becoming this plastic, which is this heightened um, sort of superficial view of femininity that
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
highly dictated by social pressures and this perception of what they think a woman should be without a lot of substance or real uh, connection with humanity. And so there's a lot
Mhm.
of these dynamics that play. And so we're asking these questions. Okay, well, what does it mean to be a woman? And I think Jo March, Little Woman, that's one of those stories that I think resonates with me in really representing that fragmentation and why you're seeing some of these tropes in their heightened absurdist forms.
Mhm.
Because grounded within us throughout histories, there's this question of, well, what is the role of a woman? And
Mhm.
in the newest Little Woman by Greta Gerwig, uh, Saoirse Ronan has a speech in the attic where she's talking to her mother, and
Mhm.
she's I won't spoil things, but tragedy has happened, and so she's sort of like picking up her life and figuring out what do I do next, and
Yeah.
she contemplates marrying a person, and her mother really asked, do you love him? And she's
Mhm.
like, I'd rather be loved than
Be alone.
love. Yeah.
Mhm.
And he said that's not the same thing.
Mhm.
And she has a speech where she's like, women, they have they have ambition, they have talent, they have brains as well as hearts, and I'm just so sick of being told that marriage is all a woman is fit for,
Mhm.
yet I'm so lonely.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that moment right there was just like, that is I think the question that a lot of modern women, especially single young women of marriageable age, are
Mhm.
asking themselves.
It feels like a paradox almost.
In what way?
Like, okay, so see, and this is me unfiltered, like at first glance,
Sure.
the idea, when am I not unfiltered? But
Andrea, unfiltered.
I know, like, what have we been getting before? Because she seemed pretty unfiltered before. But so I never want to be offensive, but I don't mind
You
being
can't,
offensive
yeah.
sounding. It's for all the feminists watching. So actually, okay, I do think that it's like, well, I don't want to be told that being a wife and mother or married is all that a woman is fit for.
Sure.
And then saying, but I'm so lonely. That implies I wouldn't mind having a husband, so I'm not so lonely. Well,
Sure.
they sound like they're a little bit at odds.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what people feel, right? Yet there is somewhere in the middle, and I think Little Woman does this so beautifully because you have this diversity of like I have sisters, right? I grew up with
Mhm.
two sisters, and so we grew up with Little Women in the house, and we watched the 1994 version with Winona Ryder and all of these things,
Mhm.
and you. As a young girl reading that through childhood, you see yourself, pieces of yourself in all of these different characters. And you see all of these sisters who have these different talents and ambitions and the levels of ambitions and the path that they take. And they start to show the complexity of what it is to engage in the feminine story. For
Mhm.
example, Meg, the oldest, she marries the school teacher. Meg. And then
Yeah.
Amy marries the rich neighbor, but she has this ambition to be a painter, and she wants to be in the book she says, I want to be great or nothing, right? And so it shows this like level of ambition. And then you have Jo, who is more she's not interested in marriage, she thinks she will never marry,
Mhm.
and but she has this ambition to write. And
Right.
there's this scene in the newest film where she's Saoirse Ronan's character, who's Jo, is talking with Meg, Emma Watson, on the day of Meg's wedding. And she was like, we need to run away. You'll be an actress. I'll be a
Oh,
playwright.
right. She's like, I need to save you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, he's going to get boring. We'll always be interesting. But they take these, she's like, no, I'm going to get married. And they take these different paths. And you get to see the complexity of both paths, of the girl who took her passion and ran with it, and the girl who put her passion into marriage and finds the beauty in that, but also finds a struggle with that. And I don't know, there's the reason that these tropes become repeatable and true is because they are reflecting something true in the questions of femininity and the societal pressure of what that means. And there's probably more responsibility we can take as creators to think about how we're making choices about those characters and what we're doing with those things. Because I do think some of these extreme representations of women are not the healthiest ideas of what it is to embrace femininity. Yet, like the question we have to all be asking is, well, as a consumer, how do I take responsibility in the thing that I'm watching? And part of it is having conversations like this. But
should there be tropes though? Like, I mean, I shouldn't say should there be tropes, but if you are trying to make, should you aim to not have a tropey, or steer clear of the not like other girls, or like steer clear of the manic pixie dream girl, whilst creating a character?
Well, I think
a feminine character or female character.
Sure. Well, I think first we have to ask the question: can we help it? And I'm not sure that tropes are patterns that we see, that we start identifying, but like the patterns are always going to play out.
But we can't help it. Almost sometimes
we can't help it. Like we just see these patterns in life, and it's part of what helps us understand what it is to be human. But I don't think avoiding tropes is the answer. I think it's understanding the tropes, wrestling with them, and if you're going to create something, do the best you can to engage with those intentionally, with conscious choices. Now, certainly, you get too caught up in the intentionality of how you make something, it can be debilitating and you never make anything. But there's that delicate balance where the best filmmakers, the films that create lasting memories and that stick with us, the filmmakers are doing just that. They're thinking about the tropes and the things that have come before, and they are trying to either conform to them or subvert them to say something about humanity as a whole, but also the society they find themselves in today. And you can see that in Greta Gerwig's Little Women, right? It's this period.
Speaking of Greta Gerwig, I'm so excited for Barbie. Sorry, go on.
I'm interested to see how that's going to play out.
I think it's going to subvert a lot of expectations, where it's not going to just be like down with like, old timey womanhood but I also don't think it's going to be like go back to the traditional. Like, I think it might be doing a down the line. Sorry.
Sure.
What were you going to say?
No, I think Greta Gerwig clearly is a feminist and a progressive, and that comes out in her films in different ways. Yet there is this complexity in that where it doesn't feel
preachy.
Yeah, it feels like she's really dealing with humanity. And so, I'm interested to see how that manifests itself in the Barbie film, and sort of this because you can definitely see the absurdity and the heightenedness of that. And there's an interesting conversation really to think about Barbie, this toy that was given to us that in many ways was a sort of feminist, I don't want to say propaganda tool, that might be too strong of a word, but it really was trying to get women to see themselves to be able to do whatever they want while also looking,
just change your outfit,
as beautiful as you can. And when they created the Ken doll, it was designed to be the boyfriend that they never marry, the side piece. So it's sort of this flip,
the accessory,
flip of what we had seen in a lot of sort of the ideas that we saw for men in films before, like the James Bonds or, you know, whatever other sort of film you can see where men are going out and conquering the world and women are their trophies. Well,
Right.
we've taken that and Barbie is now that version for
Right.
women. And that's the question too. It's like, okay, well, is that how we want to see femininity? And
Right.
is that how we want to see masculinity? Because I don't think that's actually um, the height of what it is to be a virtuous man.
Right. The direct trade-offs is like, well, we'll just do the guy version. Like that's not.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. You were saying something about the Little Women, Greta Gerwig's Little Women.
Oh, right. So it's a period piece, yet it's very fresh and modern, and she
Well, I
did that
mean, you
on
see some
purpose.
of them wearing Uggs in some of the shots. But anyways,
That was probably an accident.
I think it was.
Knowing what it's like on films, that I'm sure that part was an
That got
accident.
missed. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But there's something about that where people, you can complain that, okay, this is not exactly how it would have been in the time and the place. But what I found really interesting with the way that Greta Gerwig approached it, she tried to take on as much of the history as possible, yet the places where she subverted that history were meant to speak to something about the modern frame and the way that women see themselves in it. And that's, I think, something we need to kind of be more upfront about with filmmaking. It's not reality. We're not capturing reality. We are taking a reflection of reality and trying to curate that into something beautiful that can speak to ourselves and the things we see in the world. And so each filmmaker has a different sense of what they can bring to that story and how they can revitalize something and make it approachable to the time that they find themselves in. And I think all art is in communication with each other, but particularly movies. And you see this with like Tarantino, right? Tarantino is full of pop culture references. And I sometimes see these videos of Tarantino where it's like, he's stealing. Look at this picture from this Asian film. His costume. And it's like, that's not stealing.
Would you call it being inspired by, or?
Well, he's purposely referencing it, right? He's
Oh,
taking
okay.
that to get you to dig deeper. Tarantino is very intentional about the way he makes films, and I'm not personally a huge Tarantino fan. I mean, I enjoy some of the films, but he's not my. I tend to like more either whimsical things or more human realist stories. And so Tarantino, I guess it's whimsical in a nature, but it's like absurdist in a violent way. That's just not my bag. But you get why people like what he does, and if you can understand the game he's playing, you start to realize, oh, okay, he's in communication with the thing that came before. And you can take that and look at it in sort of ancient texts like the Bible, right? What is some of the things that are happening in the stories within that text, like the Genesis? Well, it's in communication with other myths in and around the time that it's being created. So it doesn't bother me that, oh, well, this is similar to this other myth. Well, yeah, that's
that's
part
why
of
it's
the
a
art
myth.
form.
Yeah.
That's part of the art form.
Yeah,
so that does
okay.
make itself in movies.
So, I mean, I get the aphorism, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of comes to mind. Like, it was a story that worked, just like add that bit of, reflected within stories, so that makes sense to me. But
yeah, well, but that's sort of the question too, right? What we do when we're subverting the frames and the customs that we get to know. A lot of times it's an artist saying, Is it not broke? And maybe
Right.
should we
Okay. I
fix
see.
it?
I
Right.
see.
And so there it's this different way of expressing and joining a conversation that is not so straightforward. And so a lot of that can be really misconstrued and misunderstood. Um, but like, yeah, there's part of it that's like understanding the artist that these works come from can be really helpful, because
Mhm.
as an artist myself, I know that even though I have written pieces of fiction, or even told, in documentary filmmaking, told stories about real people. There's a huge part of that that is putting myself into those stories,
Mhm.
and not not curating a narrative about the world that is dishonest, although that can sometimes happen. But you're trying to express the world in a way that you see it and bring something to life, in a way that is not purely through just my own expression. You're using images, you're using sound, you're using colors and costumes and all of these things to speak and express something deeper.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if it is too much like real life, nobody's interested in that.
Well, you get like bored. It's like, why are they sleeping? Like I'm bored. You know, why
Yeah,
are
I
they
mean,
going out to the grocery store?
yeah, like but yeah, but there's something to that where yeah, there are times when the subversion probably doesn't make sense in a film, and like we can talk about that and criticize that in a way, I suppose. Um, but yeah, that I think some of the best things in film come from subversions. And
Mhm.
going back to 500 Days of Summer, that is the token example of subversion of the idea of the manic pixie dream girl, and trying to wrestle with that concept in a way that um,
She is it, and then she's not at the same time. I feel like a lot of people miss it. A lot of people think she just is a manic pixie dream girl, but I agree. I don't think she necessarily is.
well, that movie subverts so many um, categories. One, it subverts the category of a romance film, and it tells you right off the bat, this is
Mhm.
not a love story, right? Yet, how they play that out, you still are sort of hoping for, at least most of the way through, you're hoping for that ending
Mhm.
where these two characters can come together. There's something in us that seeks that happily ever after.
Mhm.
And then they subvert it in the way that they tell the narrative, where it's a non-linear. And I think that
Mhm.
really heightens this idea of the manic pixie dream girl, and how it can, how would you say it? How it can manifest in our own minds and be lived out. Because basically, Tom is this version, basically sort of a very human version of what this like idealistic, toxic version of masculinity that only sees women as the way to save them without their own agency.
Right.
And so you see how he makes her this manic pixie dream girl, and he's so enchanted by some of these quirks that she has, and then when
Mhm.
it falls apart, um, you see how he,
He's very bitter.
well, he does get bitter, and there's the and I think that's just very human. But in the same ways, you can look at Summer and recognize, well, oh, where was the complications in the role that she played and the dynamics of those things? She was certainly straightforward about what she wanted and
Mhm.
what she saw. And so there was some agreement, and there was certainly an amount of trust being broken, where we say we're going into this thing, but we really have different feelings and intents, and like,
Mhm.
a hope that things would change.
Yeah.
But it opens up that complication of those relationships and the way that men and women work together, and what is romance, and how does it affect us in like a deep level, not only humanly or mentally, but like spiritually.
Mhm.
um, and it really plays with that idea of like reality and expectations. There's that scene towards the end of the film where Summer and Tom have broken up. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, there's all these spoilers. If you don't want this spoiled, don't listen anymore. But
Yeah.
I think we're too far here.
Yeah. We've
Um,
gone too far. Yeah.
it's, and sometimes it's like, this movie's so old. If you haven't seen it yet, well,
What are you
Sorry.
doing? Yeah.
But there's a scene, they've broken up, but they meet on a train and they meet at a wedding, and
Mhm.
they have a good time. And so she invites him to a house party.
Mhm.
And in his head, he's like, this is it. This is
This
the
is the
moment
comeback
everything
together.
rekindles. And so you get this side by side play of the expectation of what he thought that night was going to be versus the reality.
Mhm.
And there was something so human about that, especially growing up in an age where we've all been in movies or around movies. It's probably the art form that we consume the most, and that's the
Mhm.
most available to us today, especially with streaming. We've all played the story in our head, the
Mhm.
movie of what our expectation is, and it didn't meet reality. And in that
Mhm.
point, he realizes Summer's engaged to someone else, and that leads
Mhm.
him into this deep despair.
Mhm.
And I just think there's something so brilliant about that in the recognition of like when we take on these tropes and misinterpret them or take them too far to its extreme without grounding it in reality, we can
Mhm.
definitely get in that place where we lose sight of what it is to actually be human, what it is to actually engage with people and have healthy, good relationships with people, and how we pursue love and romance in a modern age.
Like having that like expectation in our head from film,
Uh-huh.
comparing it
And
to reality.
yeah, and I think, well, one, I think it's very difficult for women because of how much of film that is marketed to us is sort of that love story, very conservative trope,
Mhm.
whereas the films that are marketed to men are often action films
Mhm.
where the guy gets the girl, but it's more of that trophy sort of perception. And so we have
Mhm.
two very distinct um, ideas that play out of what women want and what men want.
Mhm.
And I don't actually think those things accurately represent what women want and what men want.
Mhm.
But like there's like we have to wrestle with those tropes and what makes sense and um, find those ways that these films have infested us and given us this idealistic picture of maybe that's
Mm.
something that's true because I think
Mhm.
um, the
There are
another.
aspects that are true.
Yeah. Well, there's another line in the Little Woman movie at the end where she's talking to her publisher, and that's something to note about Little Woman as well. It
Mhm.
is based off Louisa May Alcott's life. She
Mhm.
adapted these characters to be like her and her sisters and her family, and so there's a level of reality that hits even deeper because it's based off these characters, but heightened in a certain sense. Um, but there's this line at the end where he's talking to Joe in the office about this book she's written,
Mhm.
and he's like, "Why didn't she marry the neighbor?" Well, the neighbor
Right.
marries the sister.
Yeah, yeah, because that's what we all when we first watched Little Women when we were young or read it, but, like, I watched it. I was like, "Why?" Like, why didn't yeah.
Yeah, well, and she purposely added this because Louisa May Alcott did not want Joe to get married, but her editor and the um, readers encouraged her enough where she did. She said, "Okay,
Mhm.
Joe's going to get married at the end." And in the film, she starts before and she's writing stories like if you're going to write a book and the protagonist is a woman, she needs to be at the end married or dead. Nobody wants the spinster, right? And so it's like
Right, right, yeah.
and so at the end they're having this conversation. Why did she marry the neighbor? Okay, so who does she marry? Oh, she doesn't marry anybody. He's like, what do you mean she doesn't marry anybody? She has to marry someone. And she's like, she
Mhm.
said the whole book she doesn't want to get married. And he says, nobody wants women to be consistent. They want them to be, they want them to be happy. They want them to be
Yeah.
married. And there's something true about that. And the whole point of that is sort of this idea that marriage is an economic proposition.
Mhm.
And it certainly was probably more true back in the day when women couldn't own property, and they,
Mhm.
um, yeah, there wasn't as much ability for them to have their own finances and such.
Mhm.
Um, but it still becomes a question today: is marriage an economic uh, proposition? And
Mhm.
you see this sort of idea sneak into things like the red pill movement, where
Mhm.
we look at what is a high value man. Well, a high value man makes six figures and all of these things, and he can sleep with all of these women and do all of these things, this
Mm-hmm.
hyper masculine frame. And then what is it? The hyper conservative, religious or traditional frame that women are sold. Well, woman is a virgin and stays at home and cooks and is a good wife. And it becomes these extremes. And so, yeah, that idea that the high value man is the high performer. It's asking that question about the economic proposition. And I certainly think you can't ignore economics fully, in a sense of what tying your life can mean to someone. But I, being religious myself, I think there is a much higher calling to marriage outside of the consumer benefit model of marriage that we often hear in modern society.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And the ending of the rom-com of the 90s, like, and how to choose, how to lose a guy in 10 days, or My Best Friend's Wedding. Like, what? Like, yeah, like, okay, My Best Friend's Wedding, like, oh, look, you kind of want her to be with him, but then he isn't, and then you're like, oh no, that's how it should be. They're totally having an affair in a year. Like, they joke about it. And then, like, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, their relationship was completely built on a lie on both ends. But yeah, so like it ends. They both end. And then we just, that ends in our heads. And we're like, okay, so that's,
well, and I think some of these stories are being influenced by the experience we're actually seeing in reality as sort of these modern roles and these really structured societies that tell us how to be a man and a woman are breaking down. We get a lot of confusion and, okay, well, how do we handle those things? And you see the rise in divorce, and you see, you see these stories in film that sort of are almost encouraging women to be the objects of men's affection. Like, voyeurism is a very prominent thing in film, where you see the camera almost in the male gaze of like seeing women as these very over sexualized, beautiful creatures that are working to appeal to men. And that gets complicated, right? And so, and you have this fight within women where we want to be beautiful. We want to be desired, at least in some way, by a man, particularly if you hope to get married. Like, I hope my husband finds me desirable, like in some sense, or lovely, or worth committing to. But what does that look like? Well, we certainly have gotten to the place, and feminism has probably helped in this, where we don't want to just be the objects of visual affection. We want a deeper sense of that. But the pendulum swinging, and you talk about this often, about females taking on just male characters and putting a woman in the shoes. Is that ideal feminism, or is that the ideal feminine?
Right, just turning it into the ideal masculine and putting a dress on it. Yeah,
I think it's very complicated. But this is the crisis that we're facing right now, I think, as women in culture. I think it particularly, the role of male and female become particularly difficult for women. One, because of feminism, because of sort of this girl boss, take that ambition you have and drive it so far that you don't think about marriage, family, and kids, or that you can have it all. Like 30 Rock is a great example of the I can have it all trope, or at least like sort of that, trying to live that out as a modern woman. But like, I think there is something very tied to the biology and the urgency of what that looks like for women versus men, that make the question harder for women. Because geriatric pregnancy starts at 33.
I thought it was 35. Did
maybe
they move it down to 33?
Maybe it might be 35, but I've heard that it's 33. But 33 to 35, you have geriatric pregnancy, which in some ways that sounds crazy. Like, What?
Geriatric? That's
Yeah,
old.
that's old. But yeah, you have to recognize that as much as our ambition has grown and our opportunities to chase that ambition have been met with more open doors, our biology has not changed.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so you do get a lot of women sort of in this crisis where they've done the thing they were told to do. They went to college, they
They
got
got
the
the career.
degree, they climbed the corporate ladder, yet and then they start to think about, oh, do I want a kid?
Mhm.
And the trade-offs of what that will look like. And
Mhm.
it's a hard question because
Mhm.
they're as a person who has gone out and taken her ambition and done things and thrown herself into industries that are not very women heavy and tried to be the best that I can in those things. You gain something, you learn something from um, taking on those roles.
Mhm.
And there's something beautiful to that. Yet there's also something beautiful in this other path.
Mhm.
And yeah, you can understand. I can understand why there is a lot of love and what's the word, like people resonate with these really
Mhm.
feminism driven stories.
Mhm.
Um, but there is complication to that as well. And so how do we balance that out? How do we find that way to get to the core of what it is to be human? Is there some sort of ideal masculine or feminine?
Mhm.
Does it require obligations from us? And how do we
Mhm.
orient ourselves in that when we have so many different stories telling us different things?
Okay, so speaking of that, actually, David Walker brought up La La Land.
Also one of my
So,
faves.
because it's pretty good at. Okay, I'll tell you. I don't have like I liked it. I really enjoyed the whole thing.
Sure.
And the sequences and all of the throwbacks to these other like great either musicals or just
Yeah.
actually mostly musicals that it did throwbacks to, and other romantic comedies and whatnot that it
And
referenced.
really this 50s sort of like the early big
Dance
picture.
numbers and whatnot. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
This big picture Hollywood, this early Hollywood that was so glamorous and
right. Well, yeah, yes. And so, but I find that there's no tropes that were like I found Emma Stone's
stone.
character to be well developed, along with Ryan Gosling's character being
Hmm.
well, like they were both leads and they both shared the spotlight quite well.
Hmm.
Ironically, actually, whereas they didn't in the film. That was the whole reason.
Mm.
They were both stars and they couldn't do what they wanted to do for their lives, and the whole like at the end, like, oh sorry again, spoilers people, like, I'm gonna always love you, but like we're not gonna be together though, and that's
Hmm.
it. And that's it's like, oh,
Well,
so we can't have it all. Is that what that's saying?
I think it's more complicated than that. And I think
Okay.
I understand why people don't like La La Land, but if you are an artist and if you're a filmmaker, there's something um, so romantic in nature about that film, and something so it draws something different out of you than if you didn't have that like background, because
Mhm.
really it's more than just a love story with each other. It's sort of uncovering this love of art and creation,
Mhm.
and what does it mean to be a starving
But they're
artist.
both
And
artists,
they're
and they're
both
both in the
artists.
starving artist space, right?
Yes, but it's funny to watch them. They have they're both artists and starving artists in their different ways,
Mhm.
but they have such a different sort of like sense and view of what it looks like to have art, except that they want this purity of the art form. Like you can
Mhm.
tell that they both, and that's what brings them together, right? This like
Mhm.
love for the purity and the belief that to see someone else love something can open your mind to be enchanted by the world as well. And you see
Mhm.
that in the scene where she's out to dinner with the like guy she's dating. I don't know, is he like a bank something? But like they have this conversation where they're talking about jazz, and she's like, "What stuff that you play in elevators?" And he was just like, "No." And he's like, jazz is like, it's it's like fighting. There's this tension in jazz. It's so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But she doesn't see it, but she's in
Mm-hmm.
this restaurant with this guy, and they're having this conversation with like someone else. They're like on a double date, and she
Mm-hmm.
hears this jazz music, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden she's like, she sees it. She's
Mm.
enlightened by the thing of like, oh my, like this is not just a thing that you play in an elevator. And that makes her ditch this date and go off to meet the guy at the theater to watch
Mm-hmm.
Rebel Without a Cause.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this thing of like, it's not just this love story between these two people. It's this complicated love story between an artist and the love of the art that they create. And
Mm-hmm.
when you walk through and look at some of the ways that that manifests in their life, you realize that Sebastian, the jazz musician, he gets this chance to be successful,
Mm-hmm.
but he compromises his dream and his integrity in that
Mm-hmm.
for the paycheck, which is something that artists are always having to kind of
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And that gives her that gives them sort of this freedom where she can work on her art and write and create this
And
one
not
woman
worry about
show.
funds. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so it becomes this trade-off, but then all of a sudden, halfway through the film where the tension starts to grow is that they realize, he's decided he's more committed to this than this like success than
Mm-hmm.
what she had originally thought before. And she's like, well, what about the jazz club? What about the
Mm-hmm.
art? What about, the love for the tradition?
Mm-hmm.
And, they get in this fight. It's like, well, how can I do that? And there's so many human dynamics in this. You can't kind of get it through it just in scenes, but there's that deep connection with that art, and it's very self-referential.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one line. You don't get to ever see her one person play, but you get the sense that she had finished it for him in their like the bedroom in their apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I love it. And she says something like, is it too traditional? Are people going to get it? And he says like, can I swear?
Yeah. 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 Sure.
He says, fuck it. Like, who
Right.
cares?
Mm-hmm.
Something to that effect. I don't remember the lines exactly, but
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly, and I love Damien Chazelle because have you ever seen Whiplash?
I'm actually too scared to see it again. I know I've seen enough. I've seen enough scenes to know how very intense it is,
Yeah.
and how that getting like beaten verbally.
Sure.
Is so that's too much for me because I get very affected by things like that. So I just
sure. I mean, it's not for everybody, but that,
right.
like, again, he's playing with the same trope of like what we do for our commitment and love for art. And in this one sense, you have sort of this wrestling with the toxic culture that happens in a lot of art worlds of being broken down by a coach or a teacher, which is sort of epitomized by that one scene of like, were you leading or were you dragging? Yeah. And then he's like, like he blows up at him, and like you just see it, the sort of torture that he goes through to try to gain genius in this sort of as a jazz drummer. But this side is sort of the lighter hearted side of that, of like the suffering we take on for the hope that
we'll make it.
We'll make it, but not just make it in a way that's pure and true and authentic to the things that we have. And what you see at the end of that film, they did not end up together, but they
got their dreams were realized, right?
In the authentic way that they had hoped for, right? She is this big movie star. She's on posters, yet there is something that is not vain and superficial about it. Mm-hmm. And he owns this tiny little jazz club in LA that works with like underground jazz artists to hold on to tradition. But he's not known and on billboards, and nobody knows that they know each other. Yet there's this connection through the music. He plays the song that first connected them together. And in this way, it's sort of that recognition that people change us. Even if we don't end up married to them, the
Mhm.
people we exchange and have in our lives change us.
Mhm.
And is there that question, if that broken relationship didn't end up in marriage and family,
Mhm.
um, was it wasted? Was it not something that was possibly still helpful, even though it doesn't fit the convention that way we see it? I think
Mhm.
that's a really interesting question, particularly in modern times where we see a lot of broken relationships and don't know how to um, make sense of that or orient ourselves to that. Excuse me.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, it's the I mean, you've made it really clear, a little bit more clear than I remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, and I've only seen it once. Probably should see it again.
I've always loved that movie, and again, I understand why it's not people's top. For me, it hit everything. I love Emma Stone, I love Ryan Gosling, I
Mhm.
love big musical numbers, I love
Mhm.
jazz, and so all of these things together, and I loved Damien Chazelle. I was very nervous going in 'cause I'm like, "I don't know what this movie is gonna be,"
Yeah.
but I watched that film, I walked out of the theater, and I bought another ticket, and I walked right back in, and I
Watch
watched
it.
it again. I don't know, it just struck a chord in me, and, I
Mhm.
recently watched it with Verdi too, and
Mm.
I'm just, yeah, it just to me, it says um, so much about what we worry about in filmmaking. I think as
Mm.
consumers, but also as creators of like, are we losing this tradition in the thing that we've created? And are we getting lost in sort of the flash and the hype and the ambition to create something valuable and something worth watching and something that reflects humanity? That is like a huge question.
Do you think so? I'm even though you said like I understand it is about more than just the romance. It's about the
Hmm.
art and the art being an artist. But
Hmm.
looking back, just to bring it back around regarding tropes and whatnot, and in romantic films, do you think that it furthered or rose above other tropey films with regards to like the how the feminine was characterized? I mean, we could say for the masculine as well, but since we're talking feminine,
I mean that's hard to say. There's so many films being made today that like it's just overwhelming, and there's so different. There's so many different.
popular than I suppose I should say.
Well, and there's so many different genres where those type like the ideas of man and women and the way that they shape us and the way that they can be expressed. They manifest themselves in so many different ways. Like you look at something like The Quiet Place.
Mhm.
That was a really interesting
Mhm.
um, exploration of the idea of man and women and the role that that can play, particularly in a situation where fear or danger is involved. It doesn't. It's hard to compare that to La La Land because they're so different.
I would say
But
both of them did a very good job in portraying
mhm,
the masculine and the feminine, but
yeah, but
yeah,
I
you're
would
right.
say I think he played really well with the tropes and the things that
Mhm.
he subverted and the things that he leaned into, express so well what he
Mhm.
was seeing in the world and what
Mhm.
so many others are seeing.
Mhm.
And um, that's why people loved it.
Mhm.
Well, well, I think critics liked it, and as well as audiences. But that's why I think in one way it got Oscar nominated
Mhm.
because it spoke so truly to what I think a lot of artists are wrestling with and filmmakers are wrestling with right now. Of like, um, how do we honor the thing that came before, hold on to the tradition,
Mhm.
and express humanity in a way that's true, in the face of money, fame, ambition, and the
Mhm.
dark sides of what those things can bring out in us.
Mhm. There's a lot of deep themes. I do feel like I'm just so I guess I don't know what even the right word is to describe. I'm always sad when couples don't end up together when you want them to be together. Do you know what I mean? The
But
star-crossed lover thing? That's
sure,
sad. And maybe it's like, "Well, that's okay to be sad." It's like, "Yeah, I know. I just am
yeah.
sad about it." It just is sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally understandable, right? There's something in us that we want we don't we want to see the person that they started with end with them at the end.
Mhm.
And yet we know that that's not how life always is. And so for me, I love
No, but film isn't always how life always is. Like, that's the
no, but
confusing thing for
that's
me.
and that but that's where it's playing with things, right? Like there are films that do try to recreate life as close to as it can be as possible, and that's where you get into the realm of like Italian neorealism or
Mhm.
sort of modern realism now, where you're generally using real non-actors, not famous actors, who are the age and the characteristics of the characters they're playing, who have lived through the thing that they are seeing. And eighth grade would be the Bo Burnham film would be an example
Mm.
of this,
Mhm.
where he shot in a lot of the extras were actual eighth graders, and he shot in the school
Mm.
that they attended.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like,
That's
yeah,
cool. I
so
wanna see
there's
that. It had a limited release, and I still haven't seen it, but I really want to.
I thought it was on Netflix for
It
a
might
while,
be I had
but
forgotten about it until you just said it. So I was like, "I'll
I
go watch that sometime soon."
I saw that at the Phoenix Film Festival. It was so beautiful. I thought it was a very beautiful film, and I think it
Mhm.
really
I've heard only good things, so.
I think it really opens up because it's about eighth graders, right? But there's something I think that's true about even in adulthood, we don't lose that sort of insecure child part of us. We just learn to handle it better. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
looking how and especially growing up in a generation that grew up with like YouTube and new media and cell
Mhm.
phones, or at least at the cusp of that
Mhm.
beginning part, you resonate so much with what these kids are going through and the
Mhm.
awkwardness and the uncomfortability of what it is to learn how to grow up, learn how to find your place in the world. Um, and it's sort of like in that film, it's sort of most the opposite of the "I'm not like other girls" trope, where
Mhm.
she isn't like other girls, but she wants to be seen as that. She's seen as this shy, kind of quiet girl, and she's like, "I'm not actually shy. I really talk." And she does these YouTube videos, and she's
Mhm.
trying to be like every other girl, um, but in some ways she isn't. But again, what does it mean to be a, like any other girl?
Right.
We're all so
We're all
like
individuals. I know, but there's a sort
like
of, like, air about you, yeah.
sure, like there's and that's where it gets tricky because there is a consistency, yet a diversity. And so like how do we how do we manage that orchestra of femininity
Mhm.
in our lived lives? It's very complicated.
Mhm. I do need to do a shout out really quick
Okay.
to Upcycle Club. Thank you for I think it's the 30 euros. Thank you very much. You just wrote thank you. I would have loved to answer a question, but, like, you're welcome, and thank you. I think this is my first,
Your super chat or
super chat
whatever.
ever, like,
Wow.
ever. So, thank you.
Congratulations.
Now I need to know how to access my YouTube account. And how to, like
You're learning,
we're all learning with this stream. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much, though, Upcycle Club. I think I've seen you on Twitter, so that's how I know you. Thank you very much. I will always thank anyone who ever gives me a super chat, of course, as you do. But I really do appreciate it because I never expect anyone to ever give me any amount ever. So thank you so much. I think that's I mean, I can't really see questions, but yeah, so that's done, and now it's out of the way.
Yeah, I saw someone saying something about Black Swan. I have
Oh,
not seen
okay.
Black Swan. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Black Swan. I just haven't yet.
Where
Although
is it?
that one I think is also sort of darker in this idea of ambition and those sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I have seen
Um,
it once, and it was quite psychologically
heavy.
yes, heavy is a good way of saying it. Um, yeah, I mean, I haven't you kind of need to think about those sorts of things and watch these sorts of films again to really get into the
Yeah.
mindset, and I don't wanna I'd love to talk to somebody who has then, but
Hmm.
oh, and then there's
Well,
also Everything Everywhere All at Once. I loved that movie, and I do wanna watch it again.
yeah,
Anyways,
yeah, I really like that film as well.
yeah.
It's been a long time. I saw that in the theaters. It was a long time since I saw that, but there's something interesting about that.
Well, it deserved every Oscar, anyways.
But yeah, there's something about the metaverse that people are really interested in, and it's
Yeah, well,
probably has something to do with this feeling of fragmentation in our narratives and feeling like we're walking contradictions of ourselves in so many ways.
I didn't think of that, but that's actually a really good insight, and I will think on that more. I thought that people really liked it because not just it, but there's like a couple other films out, but this one was the best one of the year, I'd say, of last year. That's right. Well, I would say best one in general, but like the best one also of this genre of a positive nihilism. There's a couple films that go into that direction, and I kind of think it's the new thing
Positive
lately.
nihilism.
Yeah,
Well, there's certainly dangers to that
I
idea,
do.
but
I agree. I definitely think that there's like it's this idea of like this is all we have, so like do the best. Let's
yeah,
do the best we can because it's so momentary. That's why it's
which you
a gift.
understand how that would manifest that itself if you think that's all there is. But
Yeah.
as an Orthodox Christian, like, well, there's something a lot more. So there's something to watch and learn about, the uh, the logical conclusions of some of these ideas and how they play out, and the ways that we try to make them beautiful. Um, and I don't think it's wrong to have concern about that, but I think you have to have better conversations about that, and the recognition of like, oh, what is it doing well, and why is it resonating with people? And like, where could the story maybe be deeper and more beautiful? I think
Well, I
that's the
do.
questions we really start asking.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's so many. Yes, and So something that I think that could be an answer to slightly, and it might not necessarily be something that's current, but in the past, that sort of, and I've heard Paul Vanderklay talk about this, the sort of "I'll fly away, oh glory" kind of thing. Like someday, don't worry about now. We're gonna all go
To heaven, and yeah.
spirit in the sky style, yeah, like and I understand no, this is the moment now. Don't be worrying about the future of not worried, but don't be putting it off till my treasures up in heaven being stored. Live it now. So I do understand that. I see that there being something even within a religious context,
Sure.
which I know the Orthodox
We see
view
things differently.
is
Yes.
different from the Protestant view.
Yes.
Yes, because I know that "I'll fly away, oh glory" is very much a Protestant,
It's Protestant,
North
yes.
American Protestant hymn.
Which
So,
is probably the reason why you're seeing that manifest in Western culture in this positive nihilism. I think there is
as
something
an answer to that,
is being influenced by that sort of that idea and expression. And I certainly have a different view of things. But yeah, you can kind of see where people are getting these ideas and understanding these narratives. And then I think that's helpful in recognizing, okay, this is why they see the way the world is and the answer to that. And you can start asking yourself that question. Well, is that all there is? And what does that mean in real life?
I have to go soon. I mean, I
No
think
worries.
my kids have been fine the past hour and 23 minutes, but I probably should go be like, hey, get off the video games and let's eat some lunch. No,
Sure.
but so before we wrap up, I wanted to go back. You said you were bringing up a video. You asked my opinion about the cool
yes, the
girl,
not like other girls.
not like other girls, which they might be
Yeah.
separate, but they're similar. And
Yes.
then we kind of just went, and we never circled back. So I do want to.
I'm glad you brought it back. I meant to circle it back, but then I got lost. I'm a tangent speaker.
Oh,
so.
no. But as a
Clearly,
host, I always try to hold on to my.
No, it's great. Yes, perfect with my my constant switching of pop culture references.
No, but it's so good. I'm glad we touched on those since. But yes.
Yeah, no. So there was this video that I watched on sort of this not like other girls trope, and it was this idea of the not like other girls in modern or in period pieces with costumes, design, and dress. which
Mhm.
I thought, I was like, I wonder
Well,
if
please send it
Andrea
to
has seen
me.
this.
I may have.
Um,
I don't remember.
well,
Yeah.
because the girl was sort of talking about this idea of how in a lot of these period pieces, you always have this, or in modern times where they're doing this period piece, you have this scene where um, the young girl is being put in the corset
In the
for the
course,
first
I
time, and
probably have seen
she's
it actually. Yeah. Yeah.
and she's always like, "Oh, this is so uncomfortable," and she's like, "That's not how life would have been. They would have been wearing corsets already," and it sort of reflects this sort of modern sensibility that corsets are these the symbol of
Restrictions.
restriction. And she talked with the show Anne with an E, which I actually haven't watched that. I've watched
Mhm.
the old Anne of Green Gables, but I
Mhm.
didn't watch
Same, but I haven't watched the modern one. Yeah.
the new one. But yeah, she has a scene where she sort of like throws it off and tries to like wear pantaloons. And
Mhm.
again, this is sort of one of these stylistic choices that are trying to express itself in in a modern frame, in a way that modern women would understand it. And so on one
Mhm.
hand, you can say, yes, it's probably not historically accurate, but this is probably why they're subverting that expectation and that choice.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's a conversation to have about artists taking those liberties and how well we should think about those things. But it was that
Mhm.
other side of my head that said, okay, yes, let's have that conversation, but we have to realize that filmmaking is not trying to be history. It's trying to connect old stories and revive them and give them life and pull out the things that are the through lines um, uh, in these old stories and bring them to life in a way that modern people can understand them and
Mhm.
express that. And so yeah, I thought that was interesting. I was like, I'm
I
sure
I
this
very
is
much have opinions. So I have so many opinions about this. Well, because I've watched the historic costume YouTube community. They many videos have been put out about this, and especially when it comes to film, it's a shortcut to saying something. It's like the quick
Mhm.
hand, like that's this sort of
Mhm.
thing, to say, oh, she's restricted and she wants to not be like other girls, basically. She wants to
Sure.
be different and
Exactly.
more independent. And again, it fits that whole she wants to be free, and that means being more masculine, wearing pantaloons. Okay.
Yeah.
You
Well, and
know,
that was the extreme. But and she had mentioned Greta Gerwig's Little Women about that a little bit in like certain things that she did. But in this commentary, she didn't go too much into that. But that's where it sort of sparked, where it's like,
mm,
there's that balance, right? There's probably some truth in the criticism, like we can't take this that far because we look at some of these portrayals of these women, and there were reasons why they tried the pantaloon thing, but then they realized it was actually distracting. And there was a lot of women who would refuse to not wear corsets or not wear dresses, or sorry, or not avoid dresses
mhm,
because that was a symbol of holding their femininity while still moving towards this more holistic, dynamic sense of what it was to be a woman. And that's a really interesting conversation.
well, it is, and see, so you're looking at it from, which makes sense, the filmmaking sense, and so
Yes,
the historic costume folks are looking at it from
a
historic
historic
costumes.
sense.
And so,
Exactly.
yeah, and so
Speaking two different languages, and like
right,
you have two different.
right, and so the main issue is there are some historic lies. And I
Mhm.
do want to say you could say lies or untruths that have been perpetuated that are just not true, and it's the same way that um like the people in the Middle Ages didn't bathe. Like that's actually not necessarily true.
Mhm.
Um, there are some truths to some of those things, but it's not you can't just on a whole say that's it's not true, or that they didn't
Right.
wash their hair, or like washing hair is a completely different thing for like for the past than like you didn't have copious amounts of water available, so they would use this thing called powder and pomade to keep clean. They had ways to keep
Right.
clean in a different way than modern. And regarding the corset, that they didn't tight lace, so that's something that we imagine. Oh, so they were just squooshed the whole time, can't breathe, whatever. And so actually, like you would not tight lace. You would actually lace according to how what was comfortable. And yes, some actresses apparently it was actresses or I wouldn't even say models. I think it was just actresses, people who were in the public sphere, like, and scene. So particular actresses would tight lace for their look, but most of the time you wouldn't. And actually, I'm getting into it. So you just struck a chord. So a lot of the time, it was actually women who made corsets and stays. It was stays before stays existed, and then they turned into from France the corset, and it would be women who would be the ones who had these shops to make the corset. So it's a very feminine industry, and a lot of the time, the actually, like, men would make at newspapers for making like comedic little comics thing at women's expense. Just, like, what are we going to write about this week? Oh, let's just make fun of women and their corsets. So a lot of the time, because it was a space that men were kept out of, a lot of the time they would actually do jokes about like women and how they're tight corset. And it actually, so a lot of this was perpetuated through old, like, sort of, you could kind of say sexist, like, looking at the corset, because it was a way that men could speak about corsetry and undergarments without talking about it. Like, they're not talking about it, but they're talking about it in a, like, oh, see, it's just a joke. It's just a joke, though. We're not being untoward, it's just joking. But so a lot of what we have in our culture, in our heads about corsetry, the negativity, is a result of those sort of comedic bits from like newspapers from back then. So anyways,
there's an interesting dynamic with the idea of corsets and fashion pieces within modern history, because how many we still see women producing corsets for other women because of the idealized look of what that was to be, a part of the old time. Or you can look at modern ways of like waist trainers. They're basically,
and that is the modern version of that.
Sure.
Yeah, of the corset. It's gone through an evolution, and now it's just pantyhose. No, or Spanx.
Yeah, Spanx. Tuck everything in, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like I think there are good questions like, well, why are we doing this? Is there
well, that happened in the 20s, right? They stopped wearing the corsets in the 20s.
Sure. Well, yeah. And the fashion evolves, and fashion's very interesting, because you can't get away from the truth that fashion trends have always highly been influenced by the sex trade and the sex industries. Now, I don't mean to say that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like we shouldn't wear, our knee-length dresses, because that was what a prostitute would have worn, how many years ago or whatever. But that there is that complicated nature with fashion, and the way that as women we look at what is put in magazines and in windows and on these actresses, to say this is what it is to be a desirable, fashionable, beautiful woman. There's that complicated relationships with the way that we adorn ourselves. And women have far more choice and sort of ambiguity in what is fashionable and what is, how would you say it? What is appropriate than men do. And it probably is something to the effect that I think women are more drawn to natural inclinations of beauty than men. And going back to sort of the manic pixie dream girl trope, that's why it exists, right? You like there is something about women in our nature. We're more drawn to see beauty, and when we see that, it enlightens something
and to embody it, right, as well.
Yeah,
like for women.
Yeah. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, where is it in its proper orientation and place?
Right.
And
Yeah, of course.
how can we stop this sort of trope of being so adorned by the outer level of what is beautiful, that we become plastic, that we become Barbies in a sense.
I know. Yeah.
And lose the holistic nature of beauty in the soul and the heart and the body and all of these other beautiful things that come with uh, marriage and motherhood, and that's a whole other conversation. But when we're looking at um, any movie, but particularly like romantic comedies and movies, the end goal is very often walking down the aisle with the fated someone, and
Mm-hmm.
it stops there.
Mm.
What does it look like after happily ever after?
Mm.
What does it look like to have kids? And most of the movies that do involve having kids, that becomes the problem in the relationship, because
Mm.
you lose the spark, you lose the fire, you lose this sense of like excitement and grabbing the world by the reins and living life. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we're losing sight of the beauty and just the simplicity. And
Mm.
that's why I tend to like realism as well, because whimsy sort of heightens these things in beauty and kind of over exaggerates and takes things to the absurd. But realism grounds us, and it lets beauty speak in these small, quiet moments. And
Mm.
I think there's a place for both, and they're like a beautiful relationship with both, and they're both very complicated.
Mm. Like a tension between the two.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good note to end on, because we could just keep
Yes.
on for hours.
I could
But
talk about movies all day.
I'm glad that you brought it back around to
Yes.
end with that manic pixie dream girl
Thank you. I
idea.
took us on a journey. I've
You
curated the
did.
story.
That's what we wanted to do. And I think this is a successful first live stream using StreamYard
You
for me.
you got 30 euros.
I
I would count
know.
that as success.
Absolutely. Now I just needed to learn how to access it.
Oh,
But that
well,
shows how successful I've been on YouTube the past few years. But anyways, but this was so great. I really
yeah.
appreciate you coming onto my channel and to chat about these things. I haven't actually put out like much at all. It's been, speaking of having it all as a woman, I started working 2 days a week now, and it's summer and I have my boys home, and with the way that I have been putting out videos lately, I do the interviews, but I also have been trying to do a scripted and edited video with clips, and that just takes a lot of time, and I don't have as much time nowadays because I'm keeping a household and working and having my kids, and so it's trying to have it all. I mean, that's why we're looking at this as a quick and something to do, as like, okay, maybe I'll be doing more live streams now.
Yeah. They're much easier to produce.
Yes, I know. Just start broadcasting and end
Yeah.
broadcast and it's done. But yeah, but I don't want to neglect my channel, because it's part of the something that is my like hobby and like deep interest, which is why I brought my channel in the direction of film in the first place. And so
Yeah, well, it brings value, I think, to not only online spaces, but I think also estuary spaces.
right.
In as much as I'm not for diversity quotas and sort of the complications that those bring, there is something about having the perspective of women available that changes the conversation.
Different. It is
It's different.
literally. I remember, I'll mention this before we go. I heard on this one podcast, I haven't listened to it in a while, but it's called The Femsplainers, and it's with Christina Hoff Sommers
Mhm.
and Danielle Crittenden, and the two of them, they interview people for whatever subjects they've been covering. I haven't listened to it in a while, but there's one person that was I think that they were an anthropologist, like the kind that works with chimps, and they were saying that the notes that like, this isn't she's not with the group who did with the Jane Goodall folks. It's a different group,
Sure.
and that it wasn't until she came that she noticed things especially within the female chimps that were missed from the male observers. Sorry, from the guys watching, anthropologists watching, and she was like, you guys, like, there's this. I don't have examples, but like there's this and this that is a sort of under subverted, like there's not subverted, but like, what is the word, implicit little things happening within the female circles that were just this went over the men's heads, because it's not, they don't think that way, but for her as a female, she noticed these little things, and it wasn't like, oh, this is so bad that they missed it and it's so amazing that she noticed it. it's just factual. It
Yeah.
is, she's a woman and she noticed some things that they fill in the different spaces, right? So
Yeah.
that
Well,
was kind of cool.
it's really interesting. I was in New York in September of last year, and I went to 30 Rock.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a TV mecca, right?
Yeah.
And I went into one of these buildings because there was like something blocked off. I don't remember which one it was, but there was this art piece on the wall that I actually didn't notice when I first went in. But I started talking to the guy who's in the lobby, and I got his number down so I could talk with him for my podcast, but I lost his number
Oh.
or like his email, and so it's I'm hoping it's still somewhere around. I can find it, but he was explaining this art piece in the um, at the top, and it's so easily missed. But it was one side was a man on a horse with an arrow, and the other side was a woman. Um, and I think maybe she had a flower or something. I can't fully remember. But in the middle, there was this bird, and they were both looking at this bird. And he kind of described how in the artist frames, there's this recognition of the difference in the men and women, where the woman sees the beauty in the bird, and
Hmm.
the man sees the danger. And so
Mm.
by coming together and like being influenced by the other, all of a sudden we get a more holistic picture of um, the world and how to see it. And
Hmm.
it was very interesting. But that's how I sort of feel with a lot of these conversations of like, well, why we want women in engineering or filmmaking or all of these fields that are more dominated by men.
Hmm.
um, that's not necessarily a wrong instinct, because I do think that it's sometimes women can bring out and see things that a man might not be able to, because of the different ways that we're wired.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, having these quotas to do that becomes
That's
problematic.
too forced. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's those questions of like, can men and women work together? How do
Hmm.
we operate in those different spaces? And how do you count the trade-offs for what it might cost to have um, those jobs? Because being a
Hmm.
woman in entertainment is not easy.
Mm.
It might not be as sexist and misogynistic as some might think, but
Hmm.
it's definitely not easy. But in the same way, it's not easy to be a woman engineer,
Mm.
and the hours and what that calls, and again, what you're
And those responsibilities
sacrificing.
that are at home that you
Hmm.
have to come back to yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But
Hmm.
anyways,
Anyways, good. Well, good talk, girl. This was
yeah,
great. I'm so glad that this worked out timing wise.
yes.
And
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for asking me about
mhm.
it.
Well,
I
I'll
hope it
definitely
was
have you back.
helpful.
Well, I want to have you back. I mean, I don't know. You might have this talk on your channel, but I like where you cover it. But I want to talk to you about Taylor Swift because it wasn't like she's the example of all these things, these subjects that you laid out in
Yeah,
the
I
last
think
time we spoke.
she's a great case study on the fragmentation of women
Yes.
and the stories that were told.
Yes. Okay. So yeah. Yes. And so I do want to do that. Maybe if we have time for one more live stream before the festival, as if
Sure.
that's like the main
Maybe.
thing. But I
Yeah.
would love to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, let me think about that, because I also am expecting a baby
I
in
know. I
August.
know. I know.
So I have to figure out how
If
all of that works.
possible. If
But
not, that's fine.
it's potentially possible. I just can't make commitments now, but
I know.
I'm happy to talk about Taylor Swift, or superheroes or westerns or whatever you want me to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about.
yeah. That'll be
I
good.
enjoy,
Okay.
like, I have this weird joy. Well, I have a complicated relationship with pop culture, but there's something
Mhm.
about it that I kind of enjoy, because I do think it connects people in ways that intellectual pursuits can't always. And
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
enjoy delving into the complexities and the weirdness of what that is.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, yes, and so that's why, it's always good to have like, oh, no, next time.
Yeah.
On the next
Next
episode,
time.
let's look at this.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you to you. I think I thanked you already, but I'll think second time. Thank you again, and thank you to everybody who stayed or joined or even left, or maybe we'll watch the end. Thank you so much for all your comments and everything, and I hope that next live stream will be less bumpy, but I actually think it went pretty well. So,
I
thank
think
you,
it went
everybody.
fine.
Good times. Okay, and
Bye.
bye.